Good morning. I'd like to show you the difference between a typical AMR smart meter base type monitoring reporting solution that you can buy from many manufacturers and NoWatt. The first thing to say is that NoWatt differs because we don't use billing meters, we don't use smart meters or half-hourly meters to bring in information. They're not our data source. We have our own dedicated hardware that's built for the particular purpose. We don't think a billing meter is the right tool to actually do monitoring. What we do is we monitor consumption to exactly where it's being consumed, when it's being consumed, and even to the individual appliance. And we think that's necessary if you're going to enable behaviour modification. It's going to be essential if you're going to police that modification. We think it's also essential if you're going to actually adopt best of breed practices. And lastly, it's essential if you're going to perform real return on investment calculations. You can't tell how much something new is going to cost if you don't know what the existing infrastructure or operation is costing to run at the moment. So that's what we do. Let me show you the difference. Here we've got something familiar to you all, I'm sure. It's a half-hourly report for a Friday in June at some restaurant. You're probably all familiar with this type of display. And I have to ask you, what does this tell you? Obviously it tells you that the restaurant used £80 worth of electricity that day. It shows you that the base load was about 25% that of the maximum load. It even tells you, I suppose, that lunchtime, 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock are the busiest times. But that's about all it does tell you. What it significantly doesn't tell you is it doesn't tell you what you're spending that £80 on. It gives you no clue as to where it's going. And because of that, you've got very little to go on if you wanted to reduce that £80. Now I know some people will argue that what this does is provides a baseline from which you can spot anomalies, and then you can go and investigate those anomalies. But I beg to differ. If I actually show you the same restaurant the following Wednesday, you'll see the actual consumption has changed. It's less, and you'll come up with some reason why, I'm sure. But the fact is, there's a myriad of reasons why the consumption changes. It's not just the day of the week and the consequent change in level of turnover or occupation. It's the season. It's the weather that day. In this sector, it's even the actual shift that's working. There are many, many reasons why the consumption will change. And trying to get a baseline is very difficult. You really are you're just guessing. You're guessing here, for example, that this next Tuesday is using less than Friday because they're not as busy. You guess that it's busier than the Wednesday, but they're just guesses. You don't really know very much. That's unless you've actually got NoWatt. Because with NoWatt, you can actually delve in to any of these energy feeds and see where they're going. Here I've expanded out the electricity node for that restaurant, and immediately in the top right hand grid there I'm seeing all the appliances, and they're ordered by the biggest consumers to the smallest, and the biggest consumer in this particular restaurant on that original Friday is the freezer. It's using 113 kilowatt hours, 13 odd pounds of that £80. And you might think, well, is that normal? Well, of course, if you've just got a standalone monitoring system, you wouldn't know. You don't know what normal is. Fortunately, we do. Another thing we can do is we can actually drop the resolution down. And here what I've done is I've actually dropped it down from half an hour to every minute. And this enables me to actually see the profile of the appliance. So now I can actually see how it's drawing current. And sure enough, we look at this particular profile and compare it to any other type of freezer of that size and say, ooh, this is wrong, this shouldn't work like this. In fact, we can see, because we've seen so many of these particular type of appliances, that this particular freezer has got its humidifier running permanently. That's why it's got a 2000 watt base load. We can see, because the humidifier is running constantly, the compressor's having to run almost constantly to try and keep the temperature down. So immediately we can see there's a problem there. And sure enough, the reason I showed you the following Wednesday is that's when we actually managed to talk to the supervisor and ask him to give the thing a kick. And by a bit of fiddling, he managed to actually get it to start operating much more normally again. And there you can see, during the day after he gave it the kick at 6 in the morning, it actually started behaving itself. Unfortunately, by late afternoon, it had reverted to its ill behaviour, and we had to call in a technician. And so by that following Tuesday, we got the thing fixed. And here you can see what a compressor should look like. That's what we were looking for originally. But more excitingly, you can actually see in that top right hand grid the consumption's dropped down to around 40 kilowatt hours per day. I mean, that's 73 kilowatt hours per day less. That's 73 kilowatt hours that would have gone unnoticed, maybe for months, maybe for years. That's £2,500 a year they'd have been wasting if they were relying on half-hourly data and their intuition. You might think this is an isolated case, but in fact, I can tell you this happens all the time. Even in a single site, let alone a 700 restaurant chain like this, we'll see such anomalies crop up a couple of times a year. I doubt any of your sites are actually free from some unknown operational waste or faulty or inefficient appliance. How do we know that? We see thousands of appliances. We see them across tens of sectors. We can share that best of breed practice with you. We can tell you what it should be costing. So, if I can quickly summarise, the difference between NoWatt and the solutions you probably see many times before is resolution. We don't sample once every 30 minutes, we're sampling once every 75 microseconds. We don't install just the 3 sensors that fit each smart meter, we install potentially thousands of sensors in a large building. And that gives us the location resolution to know where that electricity is being used. So the granularity of our system isn't building, it's appliance. One of the reasons we can do that is the cost per sensor. The cost of a billing sensor installed could be over £500, and you've got 3 of those feeding the smart meter. Here, our sensors cost installed around £20, and the reason they're so cheap to install is we don't have to make any infrastructure change to install these things. They're very, very easy to install. We don't have to power down or do anything to your site. We can install this stuff very quickly, and we can do that because it's very, very simple, the hardware, because everything's done in software. This is 95% a software solution, which has yet another advantage in that we can continuously improve it. Where you'll buy a hardware-based monitoring solution around a smart meter, and you'll live with that for maybe 5-10 years, here you buy information, and that information, the quality of that information, improves, in our case, every quarter. We're continuously improving that web application, you see, and incorporating ideas not only from our own experience but from our customers' experience. How do they actually want to see the information? How does it make sense to them in their sector? Again, what should we be plotting against? Should we be plotting against particular metrics for that sector? So our tools continuously improve, and we're continuously upgrading. I think the biggest difference between NoWatt and many systems you're used to, though, is that where the existing systems in the field can tell you what something costs, and that's because that's really all they were ever designed for. What we can do is we can tell you what things should cost. So in the case of that freezer, we know, and he knows, that it costs £3,000 a year, but it was only us who was able to tell you that should be only costing about £1,000 per year. And we could tell you that because we have the cross site vision that a standalone system doesn't. So, I hope you can see the difference, and thank you very much for your time.